Okay, well, I see some people are still trickling in, but I'm just going to go ahead and begin the introductions. Hello everyone. I recognize some names already in the participants that I've seen earlier today in some other sessions. So welcome back to those of you who've been to our other sessions. But for those of you just joining us, also welcome. Just a introduction briefly. My name is Marianne Brain. I'm the NYC Service Year Support Coordinator at NYC Service. I've been working on putting together some of these wonderful webinars with our presenters that we have this week for you. We had some awesome sessions earlier today and some happening yesterday as well, and we'll have more through the end of the week. So please make sure that you sign up for some of those if you haven't already. Just a brief little housekeeping thing. Just make sure when you're joining that you put your microphone on mute, just so we eliminate background noise and can hear our presenters and our panelists speaking today. And if you do have questions, you can totally utilize the chat box in the corner. Without further ado, I would like to introduce Michael Kunkel, who's going to be speaking with us, and he also brought some panelists as well to speak to you about Peace Corps and international service opportunities. So welcome, Michael.
Thanks, Marianne. I appreciate that. And thank you all for joining us this evening. I hope you are all safe and healthy wherever you are today. But I really have the pleasure to bring some of my colleagues into this call as well, who I'll introduce in a few minutes, to talk to you about the Peace Corps. And I know with AmeriCorps and service years in general, we have a lot of overlapping kind of values and ideals, and this can oftentimes be a really great transition for after your experience with NYC service. So I'm really glad to be able to bring this content to you. I got my presentation going there. So as Marianne had mentioned, my name is Michael. I'm one of the local recruiters for Peace Corps. I've been doing this role for almost 2 years now. But before I was a recruiter, I was actually a volunteer myself. I served in Madagascar from 2014 to 2017. I was primarily working on English education projects. I was teaching at a middle school and a high school in a community in Madagascar. But I did a lot of other secondary projects in a lot of different fields outside of that as well. I learned how to speak a couple different dialects of the Malagasy language while I was there. So I got a lot of really great experiences and skills that I was able to bring back after my service and kind of leverage that not only into the career that I have now, but also just sort of like my world perspective and kind of the way that I interact with communities as well. And I am joined today by a couple of my colleagues, and I'll ask them to introduce themselves real quick, and then we'll have some time later on to get some questions from them. So y'all, Duvail, if you want to just give us your name and where you're at and what you do now, and we'll go down the line.
Sure, thanks, Michael. So my name is DeVell Riley, and I am a diversity recruiter based in the New York office. And I was a Peace Corps volunteer as well, served in Ukraine in the youth development sector.
My name's Alex Chung. I am a virtual recruiter here at Peace Corps, also in the New York office. And I am a returned Peace Corps volunteer from the Philippines.
Hey everyone, I'm Tekla Persmans. I also work with those guys in the New York City office. I'm one of the regional recruiters with Michael, and I served in Zambia from 2015 to 2017 as an education volunteer.
Thank you all, and I appreciate you all joining us and sharing your perspectives on your own service a little bit later on. Before we get into that, if you're not too familiar with what Peace Corps is, that's great. I just want to give you a couple minutes of an overview of kind of what we are, where we are working, what kind of work we're doing as well. So in general, the Peace Corps was founded to really help promote world peace and friendship around the world. We started in 1961 under President Kennedy. And the three goals that you see there on your screen are really kind of the guiding principles of our agency. So first and foremost, it's about providing interested countries with men and women to kind of meet their needs for sustainable development. And I really want to emphasize the idea of interested countries, because we're only serving in countries that are inviting us to serve with them, and we have that buy-in at really every level of the communities that we're working in. So that's really important. And then the second and third goals you see there are basically kind of the cross-cultural aspect of Peace Corps. On the one hand, to kind of promote a better understanding of Americans on the part of the peoples that we serve. So that's you sharing your American experience and representing the diversity of America. And then on the flip side, on the third goal, is to promote a better understanding of other peoples on the part of Americans. So this is really what me and my colleagues are doing here today, is sharing you about our own services and the communities where we lived and we worked in as well. So that's kind of the bread and butter of what Peace Corps is all about. This map kind of gives you an idea of where we have programs all across the world. We have operations in about 60 different countries. So you can see there's a pretty large breadth of places that Peace Corps volunteers do serve. I think it's important to note and recognize that certainly in this moment of COVID-19, and there's a lot of uncertainty in the air, we have temporarily suspended all of our global operations overseas. So we've brought all of our volunteers back home for the time being, but we do have every intention to be able to return to these countries and to restart programs. The how and the when and the where, that is still a little bit up in the air. But we do have all those intentions to come back. So it might be a little bit hard for us to give you some hard details at this point, but do know that we are really working to return volunteers to the field when it's safe to do so. And when we do, here's an idea of all the countries that you could potentially be going to. Now, every Peace Corps volunteer has what we call a primary work sector, which falls under one of the 6 categories that you see here. So a bulk of your work as a volunteer would be under one of these umbrellas. And when you go on our website and you look at some of the different opportunities that we have, these are kind of the buckets that you're looking at. So it depends basically on your academic background, your work history, your volunteerism, just personal interests, wherever you see yourself potentially aligning, those are some primary work sectors that you can think about. And in addition to that, every volunteer has the opportunity to create secondary projects in their communities. And that's really meant to kind of marry your background and your skills and your interests with what your community needs and what their resources are. So you can oftentimes be a little bit more creative, a little bit more flexible with some of those projects. But those are typically things that you would organize once you actually get to the community and start to get a little bit of a lay of the land. So throughout the conversations tonight, my colleagues and I will definitely talk to you about our own experiences with primary work and secondary work, so you can kind of see those distinctions. But I think it's important to recognize that we do have those options as well. So without further ado, I'm glad we had a good baseline of what Peace Corps is. I want to kind of give the floor over to my colleagues who had joined me tonight and talk a little bit about their service. So we'll start with Duvail, and I really want to kind of talk a little bit about more what you were doing in your service, what or who kind of inspired you to seek out Peace Corps, and we'll take it from there. So Duvail, it's all yours.
Great. So I learned about Peace Corps while I was in college. I was studying photography and journalism, and being from the Midwest, I never really had an opportunity to kind of get out into the world and see things in a different perspective, just because of the economic means or just the availability for various reasons. So my upbringing is mostly from the Midwest, going to school in Southern Illinois University. Where I learned about Peace Corps, actually from a friend, and I talked to a recruiter just to get a little bit more information, kind of like what you guys are doing today. And it just got stuck in my head that this is something that I really want to do as an opportunity to kind of give back, as a way to kind of see the world in a new light. And also not realizing it, but after I graduated, I found it really difficult to find a position in my career field, in my degree. So I was working at a job that just wasn't really aligned with the things that I thought I would be doing. And I saw Peace Corps as an opportunity to kind of get me exposure and just to see something and learn something different that can kind of guide me into a new career path. And at that time, I wasn't really given kind of as much flexibility as you might have right now as far as where you go. So Ukraine was the option that I was given. And honestly, it wasn't something that I was that excited about, being that it was very similar to what I thought the Midwest was like. I thought it was going to be cold and just kind of just not what necessarily what I was looking for when I thought about traveling to another country to see something different. Um, but I really, that idea of being a Peace Corps volunteer really stuck with me, and that's something that I just really wanted to do. And so I just embraced learning about Ukraine, learning about the culture, and really just setting my expectations, and just going with it. And once I got there, I was just really impressed and really amazed at, getting to know people and the culture and the history of a place that I never even considered, I never really learned about. And so as a youth development volunteer, I was able to work in a classroom, um, mostly like doing after school work. But I also got to work with teachers on lesson plans and just sharing about culture and perspectives of life in America, um, using my experience in school, in my undergrad as a photography and journalism major. I was able to set up after school programs, starting a student newspaper, working on photography and journalism clubs, and also just doing things that I didn't really think I was qualified for. But Peace Corps gave me that opportunity, gave me those resources to really develop my craft and being able to teach and share more about what it is to how to like speak English and teach English, and also teaching about HIV and AIDS prevention. But as a youth development volunteer, I was able to really dive into a lot of different activities with youth. So not having a health background, I never thought I would be teaching HIV or AIDS, but I was giving those tools to kind of go ahead and do that and build my own capacity in that too. I was able to, build relationships that I didn't think I would. That wasn't my focus when I was in Peace Corps. I thought I was going to be of service and just do whatever I can to just help a community out, but I didn't realize the impact that it would have on me, as far as the relationships that you build while you're there and the opportunities that you get to have. So yeah, it really impacted my life. It really, honestly, was one of the best things I've done, and really opened up a lot of doors and career paths that I didn't even think were an option. So it's made a big impact on my life as far as how I want to continue my career path, and also just the perspective I have going forward with like making life choices and ways of navigating around the world and interacting with different cultures as well. So yeah, so it's been a great thing for me.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that too, Vale. Next, I want to turn it over to Tekla to talk a little bit about her experience in Zambia.
Yeah, thank you. So, like I mentioned before, I was an education volunteer in Zambia. So I was serving as a English teacher at a primary school. So that picture down at the bottom left is actually my sixth grade class that I taught. And some of my reasons for going into the Peace Corps were it was something I had always grown up with and grown up around. Both my parents are actually returned Peace Corps volunteers. So it was something that I heard a lot about in my childhood, and a lot of their friends they had met through Peace Corps. So kind of seeing those lifelong bonds and relationships that you make through something like this. And so after college, I kind of in the same vein as Duval was unsure of where I wanted to go and what I wanted to do. And Peace Corps was always something that was in the back of my mind. And I just decided to take the leap and to apply. In my application, it was apply to serve where needed most. So I just selected which work sectors and which geographic areas I was interested in. And then they came back and said, would you like to do education in Zambia? And I was like, well, first I have to look up where Zambia is, but I'm super in. And I'm so glad that that was the country that I did my service. Outside of teaching, I did a lot of projects with youth. So doing like girls clubs and boys clubs where we taught life skills, health, leadership skills, all sorts of things like that. But yeah, some of the biggest benefits, like Deval was saying, is the relationships I built. I lived with a host family all 2 years, and it was just so amazing being able to be accepted into their family and like really treated like their daughter. And it was just an incredible experience, something that I'll never forget. And I'm very lucky as a recruiter, I'm able to reflect upon my Peace Corps experience every day. And keep it close to me, and I still talk to my host brother and my host sister, so it's always there with you.
Thank you, Tekla. I appreciate that. Next, we'll turn it over to Alex, talk about his experience in the Philippines.
Hey everybody, yeah, my name's Alex again. I was an education volunteer in the Philippines from 2016 to 2018. I was at a high school, so I was a secondary education volunteer, and that was an amazing experience. At the beginning, I was able to kind of work with a lot of different teachers and kind of hit from grade 7 all the way up to grade 11. And actually, when I was there, it was the first year they had grade 11, and then the next year it was the first year for grade 12. So right when my batch started, or my cohort started, is when they introduced the senior high school for grades 11 and 12. Otherwise, the Philippines actually only went up to grade 10 beforehand. So it was really cool to experience as well. But I actually mostly stuck with grades 7 and 8, as you see in that picture at the top right. That is one of my classes. And they were absolutely incredible. I was able to teach English and actually computer education. My school actually received a computer lab upon my arrival, and none of the teachers really had experience. And there was no set curriculum for this class, even though they were distributing these computer labs all around the country. So granted, I had a degree in IT and taught English, so don't worry about your qualifications. There is a spot for you here at Peace Corps no matter what. And yeah, we actually developed an entire curriculum together for that computer education class, from learning the basics of a computer to learning Microsoft Word, PowerPoint, Excel, and I was able to teach some grade 9 students actually some web development, and we just made some offline web pages for the school. I actually didn't grab them, and I'm so sad I didn't save them, but they were incredible, I promise you. They were writing HTML and CSS. And yeah, it was incredible just being able to bond with my students, bond with my fellow co-teachers. I was able to kind of start some remedial reading programs for the grade 7 students. I started like a mini library for students to check out books and bring home and read and come back to school and return the book from donations from local organizations. And I coached the chess team, even though I'm terrible at chess, but just happened to be that way. So be prepared to have some random responsibilities thrown your way, and you just got to do it. But yeah, that's just a quick summary of my service. I won't take too much time, but if you have questions, let me know. I'll be in the chat box. More.
Awesome. Thank you, Alex, and thanks to everybody for kind of shedding some light more on their experiences. And yeah, and you're right. I think we're going to kind of move in and leave the floor to our participants as well too, and to all of you to keep asking some questions. And I see some that are coming through the chat as well, which are really great. And I appreciate Duval and Alex and Tekla for answering those questions in the chat box as we're going. But really, I want to leave this up to you and to talk a little bit about some of your specific questions about the Peace Corps experience, the application process, what our experiences were like, because this can be a real thing that you can really look into your own future. And it helps to have somebody, I think, who's gone through that before, as you probably know in other endeavors that you've had in your life, what to kind of explain their experiences. So I see some messages coming through the chat box, which is great. I had seen a couple questions earlier kind of about language and challenges there and communication. So maybe as we're gathering some of the questions here, I'll put that to the panelists real quick. And if any of you want to talk about your experiences learning the local languages, communicating in local languages, that would be a great place to start.
Sure, Michael, I can pick up on the language factor. So in Ukraine, volunteers spoke either Ukrainian or Russian, depending on the region that they were in. And it's a country that you don't have to have any previous knowledge on. And I did not. I didn't even know the alphabet. So going into training, I was selected to learn Russian, and honestly, it was one of the hardest things I've had to learn. It was a completely new alphabet. The sounds and the letters that you think sound like they would in the Latin alphabet are completely different. So it was very challenging for me. Um, and I previously learned. I took a couple of years in high school Spanish, so my language proficiency was not great in any form. But I was so impressed at the way the language training was facilitated and the immersion that you have with the lessons because they were made to be for daily life. So you would go to the grocery store and you would uh, ask how to how to get the produce that you wanted or how much it weighed and how much it costs. So they really give you real life examples of how to use the language and build a foundation so that once you get to your site, you're not going to be like figuring out like how to you're still going to be doing that, but you're going to be better equipped, and it's going to set up a solid foundation for you to learn and improve on your language. And in many cases, people can come out of their service in a fluent language. Um, I did not, but I was very comfortable with having a conversation with pretty much anybody that I approached. I could communicate my needs and my wants, and I can still pick up some of that language today, even though it's been many years since I've been there. So.
I can touch up on that local language one too, because in the Philippines, during your training, everyone learns Tagalog for the first 8 weeks, and then the last 2 weeks is when you actually are given your permanent assignment, and that's when you figure out if you have to learn the local language. And so that happened to me. So we learned Tagalog for 8 weeks. We were tested in Tagalog, and then all of a sudden, when I got my permanent assignment, I had to learn Cebuano in 2 weeks. But so yeah, that went really well. And the Tagalog definitely gives a good foundational basis for the grammar, and then I just learned vocabulary by talking to my students, co-teachers, definitely kids. Kids are the best teachers you'll ever have while you're in service because they can't speak English, so you're forced to try to understand them. And so they will act it out for you, and they'll try to figure out and teach you the word any way possible. So that was a cool experience just to kind of be able to learn a new and local language. And within a year, I tested at advanced in my local language. So it was really nice that Peace Corps gave me that foundation and then just learning on your own.
Perfect. Thank you for those insights. I appreciate that and second all of that for sure. I want to address Jennifer's question real quick about some of the tangible benefits of Peace Corps, and then I'll turn it back over to the panel real quick and talk about another question regards to your experience before Peace Corps and how that could have helped you in your primary work. But to Jennifer's question, regarding the benefits of Peace Corps, yeah, it's really designed to kind of cover all the financial costs and sort of things that you will need during your service. So Peace Corps will pay for your flight to and from your country of service. Every volunteer receives a monthly living stipend that's meant to cover your housing, your food, your transportation, any other incidental costs in your community while you're serving. You get full medical and dental coverage through Peace Corps while you're a volunteer. So Peace Corps is basically your primary care provider, which is fantastic. At the end of your service, at the end of the 2 years, you get about $10,000 of pre-tax money is what we call a readjustment allowance. And that's really designed to help you kind of get back onto your feet after your service. I think it's very similar to kind of like the education scholarships that AmeriCorps and similar programs and Teach for America sort of have a similar deal in that regard as well. So it's designed to help you kind of get back on your feet. There's a lot of career and employment benefits as well. Every volunteer gets a year of a special federal hiring status that basically just makes it easier for you to get federal positions. It's called non-competitive eligibility. And without getting too far into the weeds at this point, we can certainly answer questions about it later on. But it just is an advantage for return volunteers who are interested in positions in the federal government, and it works across all different agencies. There's also great graduate school benefits for return volunteers as well. So if you've ever thought about a master's degree or even a doctorate, we have fellowship programs with over 200 different programs across the entire nation, all different degree types, from education to law to medicine to social work, everything in between. The minimum requirement for schools to participate in that is at least 25% tuition reduction. A lot of schools go above and beyond. Sometimes they can give full rides, but at least 25% off of a graduate degree is still a pretty great deal to have. So those are some of the tangible benefits. It's especially at the beginning of your question in terms of rent back home, it's not really designed to supplement any sort of financial obligations that you have back home, especially in a place like New York City. You're probably not going to be able to sustain rent while you are a Peace Corps volunteer. So that is just, a life choice that we can help kind of coach you through, but ultimately is going to be your decision. But other than that, there's no fee to apply to Peace Corps. There's really not a lot of financial obligation that's coming on your end. We take care of a lot of that stuff. So let's move back to the panelists real quick. And if you want to talk a little bit about that question I had mentioned earlier in regards to what sort of experience and qualifications did you have professionally before Peace Corps, and how did that play into maybe your assignment or your experience as a volunteer, if anybody wants to take that?
Sure. So experiences I had before joining Peace Corps is a question. Yeah, I applied to Peace Corps basically almost on a whim. As I said, I had a degree in IT and international business when I got out of college, and then I worked as an IT analyst for a couple of years. And so, and before that, I actually interned at an NGO doing like grassroots fundraising. And so I think that was really my drive into kind of going into Peace Corps, and being able to kind of go to different places and just present about an organization that no one had any idea about. That really translated into what I did in Peace Corps, because even though these communities ask for a Peace Corps volunteer, some people might not know what Peace Corps is or why you're there. And so obviously just working in a professional setting too, being an IT analyst, I worked with a lot of different individuals translating information from tech teams into clients and finding out what the needs were and what needed to be done. And so that's a lot of things to do at Peace Corps as well, just being able to kind of figure out what people really want or what people are expecting of you. And so, yeah, and again, we accept people of all backgrounds, whether you just graduated from high school, whether you're a mid-career professional, whether you're a retiree. We have a lot of people who come and join the Peace Corps after university, but we also had a retiree who was like 80 plus years old join the Peace Corps as well. So anyone can join the Peace Corps.
Yeah, and I can add on to that. After I graduated college, I actually served as an AmeriCorps Vista volunteer. I did a summer session where I was working in Tampa, Florida, with an organization in their summer camp program for students who were homeless or at risk of being homeless. So I did that for 3 months, and I got hired on full-time actually by the organization afterwards. So I would say that experience was really, really helpful in applying for the Peace Corps, because I was working with youth. I was doing STEM projects, tutoring, leadership skills, emotional health, and things like that. And I think it really gave me a great set of basics and skills that then I could transfer when I was going abroad and teaching in a classroom.
I'll also add that Peace Corps, we also look at your internship experience, your volunteer experience. That all really relates to being considered and really competitive to Peace Corps. So part of my reason why I got into Peace Corps as well is just the work related to youth development that I had. When I was in school, I was an RA, and I also did some volunteer work with youth through my work at the time. And the experience that I had as a camp counselor helped me with the degree qualify for youth development programs. So really don't discount the experience you get from you know from volunteering or leadership positions that you have or other organizations that you're a part of, because that really can add value to it.
Thank you for those. I think a good question that's come up in the chat as well, kind of relating to women's empowerment and female empowerment programs that we have in Peace Corps, which we all know is a lot, and particularly in the health sector. I know none of us were health volunteers in our primary roles, but I know some of us did have some experience working on health initiatives. So in those experiences, how can we incorporate women's empowerment and some of the health projects that we've worked on?
Yeah, I can jump in there. So I did a lot of health-related projects with my girls' club. So it's an after-school program. It's called GLOW, and it's pretty much in most Peace Corps countries, it stands for Girls Leading Our World. And you can do a variety of different initiatives with them. But one of the big things that I focused on was menstruation management. So creating reusable menstrual pads that the girls could use in order to, and using local resources that they could make themselves to encourage them to keep going to school and having a sanitary way to get to school so that it wouldn't impact their education. I think also some other ways to tie into women's empowerment and the health sector are maternal and child health is a really big program. So making sure that women have the resources and have the things they need to be able to give birth safely, and then also to have their baby be safe and grow at the normal rate, or a good rate. So doing those kinds of things. I think also I had one of my best friends in service started a abuse survivors group with women. And so it kind of started out as that, but then they went on to do more. They started a finance and loans group. So they started pooling their money, and women could take out loans so that they could have more financial independence from their husbands or their family, so that they were able to control and have more of that power in the family dynamic. And those are just, I could keep going on. There's so many different ways. And I think women's empowerment really ties into all of the work sectors volunteers are in, but especially in health.
Yeah, so that's great. And I would also add, in my experience in Madagascar, I also worked on similar programs around youth empowerment and specifically women's empowerment. And we did it through a lens of educating young boys and men in community that, women's empowerment and women's kind of liberation in these communities is not just a women's issue that needs to be talked about with just women. It's a men's and women's issue. And by bringing these groups of people together to empower everybody in the community, that's kind of the approach that myself and some other volunteers in Madagascar had taken in a program. And specifically related to health initiatives within that program, we invited young boys from kind of this regional area of Madagascar where we were serving. We invited them to participate in this program, and part of it was sexual and reproductive health, not only for themselves as men, but how to have those conversations with their partners and how to understand the link between teenage pregnancies and economic, inequities that, if you are with your girlfriend or your partner and you get her pregnant, that's going to mean a lot of other trickle down effects. So having those conversations and empowering young men, especially in this particular program, to have those conversations with their partners, I think was a great way to address some of those issues in our communities as well. So that's to say it can kind of go on a lot of different sides, and programs can look very different in certain ways, which is great. Let's look at the chat real quick again. I see some questions about the 2-year programs. Thanks, Alex, for answering that real quick. Let's talk a little bit about, I see a question from Jennifer again about safety, in particular women's safety, but I think if we could also address just sort of general volunteer safety as well, if anybody wants to take that on real quick.
I mean, I can talk about women's safety in particular. So at the beginning of your service, you go through 3 months of training. During those trainings, you do a lot of safety and security as well as cultural training. So you learn a lot of cultural norms, maybe things women are not expected to do in certain things, or ways that you can make yourself a little more vulnerable. And as well as you have the safety and security number who they're on call 24 hours a day. If something happens, you can always contact them and reach out, and they will assist you and make sure that you can go through the processes safely. The safety and health of our volunteers are our number one priority. As a woman, when I was serving, I definitely felt like I stuck out just because of certain gender roles and how women are viewed differently in that culture. And so it was an adjustment for sure. I never felt unsafe ever. And if I was in a situation where I was uncomfortable with some attention that I was getting, I was always able to reach out or ask for help from just strangers. So Zambian women who are walking by, I talk to them in the local language and I say hey, this guy's bothering me. Can you help me? So really you have a lot of resources and support within your community. And also I'll say most of the times when I was uncomfortable, it was when I was outside of my community. So when I was in the village, when I was at the school, I didn't feel harassed or uncomfortable. But yeah, I hope I answered your question. I'd also be happy, I can send you my email and you can talk to me more personally about it.
Thank you for addressing that, Tekla. I think we are doing fairly good on the questions in the chat, at least. If anybody has any more burning desires to add, please add them to the chat. Let's see. This question from Samia could be really good as well. Did you get a comfortable situation during your work, and you had to do that particular work? I don't know, Sami, if you want to clarify if you're talking about safety and security issues or more technical skills. We'd be happy to answer that as well. In the meantime, let's take that next question. How were you able to communicate with your family and stay connected? And then we'll come back to Samia's questions.
I can jump on that question. So the world is such a connected place now, and we had an opportunity to connect with our families and friends over the phone. We had Skype, Facebook, all these different social media platforms that we could use to stay connected. And of course, family and friends are welcome to visit you while you're in service. And you do have vacation time as well. So you can go home and visit them, or you can take a vacation together and meet up someplace in the world. So it's really, there's really no limit to how connected you can be. And also keep in mind that there are limited resources, and sometimes you will have spotty service, or you might have to travel a little bit to stay connected. But typically, I'd say most volunteers can access internet or use a cell phone. So I had no issues there.
Yeah, I can add in communicating with my family back home. I was fortunate enough to have a blog that I posted at least once a month, and that kept my family informed of what I was doing. And I was able to get on Facebook Messenger, so that was helpful in keeping in touch with some friends and family. But yeah, sometimes I didn't really have the signal, at least where my host family's house was. I could barely get a signal to send a text message, so I usually had to wait until the daytime where I would go up to my school, which is usually on the top of a big hill, and that's where I got my signals. So they were able to kind of sort of keep in touch with me through my blog posts, Facebook Messenger.
Perfect, thank you. And let's go back to Sami's question. I appreciate you clarifying that a little bit more as well. So can you talk about any experiences that you had, regarding your technical work or your primary work that maybe were uncomfortable or you felt unsure about, and maybe how did you navigate any of those situations?
Yeah, so with my work as youth development, we really didn't have a lot of structure. So it was really just like if there's an activity or there's a plan or an idea, we could explore that. And so a lot of times the administration at my school really didn't know how to utilize me to the best intentions. And there were a few projects that I worked on that were a little suspect. Um, with Peace Corps, we have to be we cannot work with any kind of government parties or anything like that. And one of my directors was aligned with one political party, and they had an event for the school for that party, and we had to let them know that this is something that we can't be aligned with because of the politics in that agreement. So that was a tricky subject matter to kind of communicate with, but it did go over once there was more just clarification as far as what my role is with this site. And there was other times when I didn't really feel as productive at times with my primary project. So that opened up a lot of opportunity for me to kind of explore secondary projects, and that's another thing that you can explore in your service. If you're interested in working with another sector, or you're doing another project, or collaborating with other volunteers in your area or within your country. There's a lot of ways to explore and learn, different project management, get involved in different activities if you have that time available too. So that's a few examples.
Thanks, Javale. A question I saw earlier, which I think could be a really good transition as well, because I know we're winding down on time, and towards the end of the presentation, I did want to give kind of an overview of the application process and some potential next steps if you're still interested. But a question I saw earlier was sort of how we have been able to apply our Peace Corps experiences to our careers and our jobs after Peace Corps. Now, I know all of us are in the unique position of being Peace Corps recruiters, and we get to live and relive and talk about our Peace Corps experiences all the time in our jobs. But for some of us that maybe had different jobs or different career paths in between, finishing our service and becoming recruiters, maybe talking about some of those experiences and how our Peace Corps skill sets and experiences have played into those roles.
Sure. So in between Peace Corps and when I worked, and then getting my role as a recruiter, I worked at a nonprofit up in the Bronx, working with youth and connecting them to community service events. And so I would say Peace Corps really helped me with that in the relationship and stakeholder building. So being able to make relationships with the teachers so I could do class talks or do programs with connections with communities like soup kitchens or park cleanup events and things like that. So I use those skills working in when I was in Peace Corps, trying to work with a lot of different stakeholders and building relationships with a lot of different members in the community. I kind of transferred those skills also into that position. And then also, I was working with youth in Zambia, and then I was also working with youth in the Bronx. So two different cultures and groups of kids, but kids will be kids anywhere. So I think that helped as well.
So after Peace Corps, I knew that I wanted to be of service, be in the community. but I didn't really have a plan yet as far as like how I was going to do that. And I also just became really intrigued and interested in learning more about the United States because I had never lived on the East Coast. I had never lived on the West Coast. And I would get a lot of questions from my community members about California and New York. And I didn't really know how to answer them, but it just made me curious. And so after Peace Corps, I, I thought to myself the best way to kind of transition back to the culture shock and to kind of figure out what career path I was going to go into related to service and community building. So I joined AmeriCorps actually, and I was a team leader for NCCC, which is stands for National Civilian Community Corps, and it's a residential team-based program where we cover a region and work on in the field with environmental projects, education, community building, and it really gave me a lot of additional skills on project management and in a new light too, because although they're both really great service projects, they're very different in a way too. So I really learned a lot about like my leadership style and the strengths that I had there, and it really gave me on the ground experience of how to work and relate my experience in Peace Corps to career paths in the United States.
Awesome. Thank you for those insights. Like I said, I did want to kind of reserve some time towards the end to talk about some of the nuts and bolts of the application process. So, if we have maybe one last question, if folks want to chime in on the chat real quick, we can take that. Otherwise, Javale, if you want to talk about the organization that you were with again real quick.
Sure. So it's an AmeriCorps program. It's called National Civilian Community Corps. They go by NCC, and it's a residential team-based program where they have, I think, 4 regions, and they cover like a 10-state radius. So I guess it's 5 regions then. So yeah, if you look up AmeriCorps.org or .gov, you can find the different branches that there are.
Thanks, Javale. So as that last question is kind of boiling up in your head a little bit, I did just kind of want to talk a little bit about what the application process for Peace Corps looks like. So really what you have here is this multi-step process, and you can best think of it from step 2 to step 8 usually takes about 9 to 12 months. That's from actually applying online to getting on the plane and departing. So our advice is typically think about when you would realistically be ready to get to step 8, to get on that plane and depart to your country of service. Work backwards about a year before that time, and that's really the moment where you could be working with one of us, your local recruiters, to work on your application and to get that ball rolling. So after you've kind of browsed and looked at some of your options and done your research and connected with any of us on the panel here to answer any other questions that you might have later on, the next step is you'll want to apply online on our website. We have lots of areas where you can get to the application. Right now, we're kind of taking more general applications to what we call serve where needed most. It's a way for you to cast a pretty wide net. And essentially what happens is you'll be, listing your preferences and your skills and your background and your interests and where you would like to be serving. And then Peace Corps will match you with a program where your skills are going to be the most useful and where you'd have the best chance of being selected as a volunteer. So there's a little bit of an element of flexibility in there, but there also is the opportunity for you to tell us, for example, hey, I've got a great Spanish background. I really want to serve in a Spanish-speaking country. Or I've got a master's degree in English education. I think I'd be a really good English teacher. So some of those things can help us, but for the most part, we really like flexibility in the application process. After you submit your application, we'll ask you to complete what we call a health history form, which is a really broad overview of your own health history. It's completely self-reported, so you do not have to go to a doctor. You don't need to provide any lab results. There's nothing really major you have to do here. This just helps us start to have those conversations and see which countries you may or may not be eligible for based on any specific medical needs that you have. There's lots of conditions and medications and things that are very easy to manage here in the US, but also in a lot of the countries where we're serving, some of those same conditions might be very difficult to manage. So we need to have that conversation early on in the process so we know where your eligibility could lie there. It's not designed to kick you out of the process, the application process. It's just designed to kind of help us better understand where you could serve safely and with full health. After you submit your application, your health history form, you could be contacted for an interview with one of our placement officers. It takes place through a video conference, pretty standard interview format as well. After the interview, you could receive an invitation to serve, which is your official, yes, we want you to be a Peace Corps volunteer. If you accept your invitation, not only will we be really excited, but you'll move to step 6, which is your medical and your legal clearance. That is the time where you're going to be going to your doctor for a physical, you're going to be doing lab tests, you're going to be getting immunizations. We're also going to be doing a background check on you as well. So step 6 takes the bulk of that timeline that I talked about earlier for the application process. And when the time comes, you'll get really specific tasks and instructions on how to complete that clearance so that we make sure that you do get the clearance. Then moving to step 7, about 2 months before you're ready to depart, you'll start some online onboarding courses. So that could just be some more training information, maybe some assignments that the country that you're going to has asked you to complete. But it's also more nuts and bolts things like, how to set up your student loan paperwork for deferment while you are serving as a volunteer, how to set up a power of attorney, get you really ready to depart, a couple months later down the line. And then you'll move to step 8, which is departure. That is where you'll be getting on the plane and flying to your country of service. The way we organize our departures, we pool together a cohort of volunteers that are serving in the same country and serving as in the same role as you. We'll bring you together in a centrally located city in the US, usually DC or Philadelphia or even Miami sometimes, depending on where you're flying to. You have about a day of training together, and then you will fly to your country of service altogether and start your 27 months Peace Corps assignment that way. So that's a really broad overview of what the application process looks like as well. Again, really want to give yourself a solid year to think about when you should be applying. Also want to point out too, we do kind of have some rolling applications throughout the year basically. Again, flexibility is going to be key in this, especially in the current sort of situation with COVID-19 when we are quite honestly unsure of when exactly we're going to be able to get back into countries on specific dates. But just so you have a better idea, for example, our next upcoming application deadline is July 1st. And those programs are going to be departing in early 2021. So if that feels like a pretty good timeline for you, I would definitely encourage you to reach out to one of us and to start working on your application as soon as possible so we can help you kind of navigate that and work out some strategies, do resume reviews, help you as much as possible. It's not a requirement to work with us. It just really helps you and kind of helps you get a more clear expectations of what the application process can be like and what your service can be like in general. So definitely want to encourage you to think about that. But in general, that's the conclusion of our panel this evening. I really want to thank our panelists, my colleagues, and my dear friends for joining me today and shedding their experiences and talking a little bit about their Peace Corps journeys. Hopefully it was able to give you all some good context and some real life examples of what it's like to be a Peace Corps volunteer. After this, if you have questions, if you want to reach out to us, feel free to reach out to me directly through all the contact information that you see there. If you want to reach out to any of my colleagues, I'd be happy to do that, make those connections, or if they want to drop their email addresses in the chat box, that's totally fine as well. We can all help you. We can all answer your questions. But with that, I really want to, again, thank you for joining us tonight and for taking some time to learn about Peace Corps. Thank you so much to Marianne and NYC Service for inviting us to participate in this and for hosting us. And hopefully we'll be able to help you build your Peace Corps applications and talk to you about service even more very soon. So with that, Marianne, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing your stories of service. And yes, this was very informational and all around wonderful. Thank you so much. Yeah, if anything, I was going to ask if I do a follow-up email to the attendees, if I could share this PowerPoint with them. Is that okay with you? Okay, great. Yeah, so I'll be following up with you all who are here today with PowerPoint. And I see all the contact info as well for our panelists is in the chat, but I can also include that in the email too, just for everybody, so it's in all one spot. So thank you again for being here with us virtually. So appreciate it. And yeah, everybody stay well, stay safe, and have a great evening. Take care.
Thank you all. Bye, everybody.